The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air like knives through butter. Inside the military transport, 8 Navy SEALs sat in tense silence, their faces painted with camouflage and determination. The mission was supposed to be routine: extract intelligence from a Taliban stronghold in the mountains near Kandahar. But nothing in Afghanistan was ever truly routine. Petty Officer Jake Morrison checked his weapon for the 10th time in 20 minutes. Beside him, his teammate Carlos Rodriguez whispered a prayer in Spanish, his lips barely moving. The other SEALs prepared their gear with practiced efficiency, each man lost in his own thoughts about what waited below in the rocky terrain. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to drop zone. Weather's getting rough down there, boys. Sandstorms rolling in from the east. Team leader Commander Rick Hassan nodded grimly. Sandstorms meant limited visibility, which could work for or against them. In the mountains, the weather changed faster than a coin flip, and tonight it seemed determined to make their job harder. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, the wind began to buffet the aircraft more violently. Through the small windows, the SEALs could see the landscape below, jagged peaks and deep valleys shrouded in swirling dust and sand. The intelligence reports had indicated that the Taliban fighters were holed up in a cave complex about 2 miles from their insertion point. The helicopter touched down with a hard thump, and the SEALs quickly rappelled out into the storm. The pilot didn't waste time. Within seconds, the aircraft was lifting off again, leaving the team alone in the hostile territory. The sound of the rotors faded quickly, swallowed by the howling wind. Hassan signaled for the team to move out. They formed a tactical column and began their trek across the rocky ground. The sandstorm made everything more difficult. Visibility was down to maybe 20 feet. And the wind carried enough grit to sting exposed skin and clog weapons if they weren't careful. Morrison took point, using his night vision goggles to navigate through the maze of boulders and dry creek beds. Behind him, the rest of the team followed in single file, maintaining radio silence except for essential communications. Every man knew that in this terrain, the enemy could be anywhere, behind any rock and any shadow, watching and waiting. After an hour of difficult movement through the storm, they reached a ridge overlooking the target area. Hassan called for a halt, and the team took cover behind a cluster of large stones. Through breaks in the swirling sand, they could make out the mouth of the cave complex below. Intelligence had been right. There were definitely fighters down there. They could see the glow of fires deep within the caves and the occasional silhouette of an armed figure moving between the openings. Rodriguez set up his sniper rifle and began scanning the area through his scope. "I count at least 6 hostiles," he whispered into his radio. "Maybe more inside the caves." Hassan studied the terrain through his binoculars. The approach to the caves would be treacherous, mostly open ground with little cover. But they had trained for situations exactly like this. The storm would mask their approach if they moved carefully. Just as Hassan was about to give the signal to advance, Rodriguez tensed behind his rifle. "Movement on the ridge opposite us," he reported. "Looks like a patrol coming back to the caves." Through the sand and wind, the SEALs could see a group of figures making their way down a narrow path toward the cave entrance. Hassan counted them quickly. 5 fighters, all armed with assault rifles. But something was wrong with the picture. One of the figures was being helped by the others, stumbling and moving with obvious difficulty. Morrison adjusted his night vision and focused on the struggling figure. "Commander, that person in the middle, they're hurt bad. Looks like they're barely walking." Hassan studied the group more carefully. The injured person was smaller than the others, wrapped in traditional Afghan clothing that made it impossible to determine much else. But the way the fighters were supporting the figure suggested it was someone important to them. "Could be a high-value target," whispered Sergeant Tony Kim, the team's communications specialist. "Maybe someone we need to capture instead of just gathering intel." The patrol disappeared into the main cave entrance, and the SEALs settled in to wait and observe. Hassan needed more information before committing his team to action. The sandstorm was starting to ease slightly, which would improve their visibility, but also make them more exposed to enemy observation. Rodriguez continued his surveillance through the rifle scope, noting the positions of guards and mapping out the cave complex as best he could from their vantage point. The other SEALs checked their equipment and prepared for what could be a long night. As they waited, Morrison found himself thinking about the injured person they had seen. Something about the situation didn't feel right, but he couldn't put his finger on what was bothering him. In his 5 years with the SEALs, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling him that this mission was about to become much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The wind continued to howl around their position, carrying with it the smell of dust and distant cooking fires. Somewhere in those caves below, answers waited, but getting to them would require every bit of skill and courage the team possessed. Hassan knew that before the night was over, some of those caves would likely become a battlefield. The SEALs remained motionless on the ridge, professional soldiers preparing for another dangerous mission in a war that seemed to have no end. None of them could have imagined that within hours, everything they thought they knew about their enemy would be turned completely upside down. 3 hours passed before Hassan decided it was time to move. The sandstorm had died down to occasional gusts, and the moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting an eerie silver light across the rocky landscape. The team had used the waiting time to study every detail of the cave complex below, noting guard positions and planning their approach routes. "Rodriguez, you stay here and provide overwatch," Hassan whispered into his radio. "The rest of us move in 2 teams. Morrison, Kim, and Jackson with me. Williams, Chen, and Parker take the eastern approach." The SEALs began their descent down the ridge, moving like shadows across the broken ground. Years of training had taught them how to place their feet to avoid loose rocks, how to time their movements with the wind to mask any sound, and how to use every bit of available cover. Morrison led Hassan's team down a narrow gully that provided concealment most of the way to the cave entrance. The rocks were sharp and unforgiving, and more than once he had to freeze in place as loose stones threatened to give away their position. Behind him, Hassan and the others followed with the same careful precision. The first guard never knew what hit him. Kim slipped up behind the fighter who was smoking a cigarette near the cave mouth and rendered him unconscious with a sleeper hold. The man's weapon was carefully caught before it could clatter to the ground, and his body was dragged into the shadows. Inside the caves, the SEALs could hear voices speaking in Pashto, the local language. The conversations were too distant and muffled to make out specific words, but the tones suggested normal activity rather than any alarm. So far, their approach had gone undetected. Hassan signaled for the team to advance into the cave system. The tunnels were narrow and carved from the natural rock, with oil lamps providing flickering light every few yards. The air was thick with smoke from cooking fires and the musty smell of people living in close quarters for extended periods. As they moved deeper into the complex, the voices became clearer. Morrison, who had studied Pashto during his deployment preparation, caught fragments of conversation about supplies and patrol schedules. But then he heard something that made him pause and hold up his hand to stop the others. Someone was crying softly in one of the side chambers ahead. Not the crying of a wounded fighter, but something different, higher pitched and more desperate. Morrison looked back at Hassan and pointed toward the sound. The commander nodded and signaled for the team to investigate. The chamber was small and lit by a single oil lamp. 3 fighters sat around a small fire, sharing a meal of bread and tea. But it was the 4th figure that caught Morrison's attention immediately. Huddled against the far wall was the injured person they had seen earlier, still wrapped in traditional robes and head covering. Hassan studied the scene through night vision equipment. The fighters seemed relaxed, talking quietly among themselves. But the injured figure was clearly in distress, occasionally letting out small sounds of pain or fear. The situation didn't match what they had expected to find. Kim whispered into his radio. "Something's not right here, Commander. This doesn't look like a prisoner interrogation or a wounded fighter getting treatment." Before Hassan could respond, one of the fighters stood up and walked over to the injured figure. He spoke harshly in Pashto, his tone clearly threatening. The person against the wall tried to shrink back further, and Morrison could see them trembling even from his position at the chamber entrance. That's when Morrison noticed something that made his blood run cold. As the fighter reached down toward the injured person, the traditional robes shifted slightly and Morrison caught a glimpse of what was underneath. The clothing was wrong, not the typical garments of a male Taliban fighter, but something else entirely. Hassan saw it too and immediately understood the implications. This wasn't a wounded enemy combatant or even a captured rival fighter. This was something much more complicated and dangerous, a situation that could change the entire nature of their mission. The fighter who had stood up was now pulling at the injured person's robes, clearly agitated about something. His two companions joined him and their voices rose in what sounded like an argument. The person against the wall was now openly sobbing, trying to push their hands away. Morrison felt his training kick in. Whatever was happening in that chamber, it wasn't part of normal military operations. These fighters weren't treating a wounded comrade or interrogating a prisoner. They were doing something else entirely, something that made his stomach turn. Hassan made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of continuing their intelligence-gathering mission, he signaled for his team to prepare for immediate action. The mission parameters had just changed completely. "All teams, we have civilians in immediate danger," Hassan whispered into his radio. "Weapons free. Take down all hostiles, but watch your fire. We have potential victims in the area." The three fighters in the chamber never had a chance to react. Kim's suppressed rifle took down the first one silently, while Morrison and Hassan eliminated the other two before they could even reach for their weapons. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. In the sudden silence that followed, the injured person against the wall continued sobbing, but now the sound was mixed with what might have been relief. Hassan approached carefully, his weapon lowered but ready. What he found when he gently pulled back the head covering would change everything the team thought they knew about this mission. The face looking back at him was young, female, and clearly not Afghan. Despite the bruises and dirt, Hassan could see features that suggested European or American ancestry. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, but when she saw the American flag patch on Hassan's uniform, something like hope flickered across her face. Morrison knelt beside her and spoke softly in English. "Ma'am, can you understand me? We're U.S. military, you're safe now." The woman's mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. She pointed to her throat and shook her head frantically. Hassan understood immediately. Either she couldn't speak or she had been prevented from speaking by her captors. Hassan immediately called for the team medic, Hospital Corpsman First Class Maria Santos, who had been with the other team securing the eastern approach. Within minutes, Santos arrived in the chamber, her medical kit already in hand. She took one look at the situation and understood that this was no ordinary combat casualty. "Everyone give me some space," Santos said quietly, kneeling beside the woman. "I need to assess her condition." The woman flinched when Santos first approached, but the medic's gentle manner and obvious medical training seemed to calm her somewhat. Santos began a careful examination, checking for obvious injuries while speaking in a low, reassuring voice. "My name is Maria," she said softly. "I'm a Navy medic. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" The woman touched her throat again and shook her head. Santos examined her neck carefully and found evidence of trauma, bruising that suggested someone had grabbed or choked her repeatedly. But there was something else, something that made Santos frown with concern. Morrison watched the examination while keeping guard at the chamber entrance. Other members of the team were securing the rest of the cave complex, but so far they had encountered no other fighters. It seemed the Taliban had left only a small guard force while the main group was elsewhere. "Commander," Santos called quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." Hassan joined the medic in the corner of the chamber while Morrison continued to watch over the rescued woman. Santos spoke in whispers, but her words hit Hassan like a physical blow. "Sir, this woman has been severely abused. The injuries are consistent with prolonged captivity and assault. But there's something else. She's wearing a medical alert bracelet under all those robes. It's American and it indicates she's diabetic." Hassan felt the implications crash over him. An American woman, held captive by Taliban fighters in a remote cave complex, unable to speak and requiring medical attention for a serious condition. This wasn't just a rescue anymore, it was a potential international incident. "Any idea how long she's been held?" Hassan asked. "Based on the healing patterns of some of these injuries, I'd say weeks at minimum, maybe months." "And Commander," Santos paused, clearly struggling with what she was about to say. "She's pregnant." The silence in the chamber was broken only by the distant sound of wind through the cave system. Hassan stared at Santos, trying to process the full magnitude of what they had stumbled into. An American woman held captive for months, assaulted repeatedly, pregnant and unable to speak, either from trauma or because her captors had damaged her voice somehow. Morrison had been listening despite trying to give them privacy. What do we do now, Commander? This changes everything. Hassan knew Morrison was right. Their original mission was forgotten now. They had a responsibility to get this woman to safety, but they also needed to find out who she was and how she had ended up in this nightmare situation. Santos returned to her patient and continued her examination. She found evidence that the woman had been given minimal medical care for her diabetes, just enough to keep her alive. Whoever had taken her had known about her condition and had kept her stable for a reason. "Ma'am," Santos said gently, "I'm going to give you some glucose to help stabilize your blood sugar. Then we're going to get you out of here." The woman nodded weakly and allowed Santos to administer an injection. As the medic worked, she noticed something else. A small tattoo on the woman's wrist, partially hidden by the medical bracelet. It appeared to be numbers, possibly a date. Kim's voice crackled through the radio from his position deeper in the cave system. "Commander, you need to see what we found in the back chambers. There's evidence this place has been used for more than just military operations." Hassan left Morrison and Santos with the woman and moved deeper into the cave complex. What Kim showed him made his blood run cold. In a storage chamber, they had found civilian clothing, personal items, and documents in multiple languages. It was clear that this location had been used as a holding facility for kidnapped civilians, possibly for ransom or human trafficking. Among the items, they found a passport and driver's license. The documents belonged to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old aid worker from Denver, Colorado. According to the papers, she had been working with a medical charity in Kabul when she disappeared 6 months earlier. Hassan returned to the chamber where Santos was treating the woman. "Dr. Mitchell?" he said softly. The woman's eyes went wide with surprise and relief. She nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since they had found her, she seemed to truly believe that rescue was possible. Santos had finished her initial treatment and was preparing the woman for transport. "She's stable enough to move, but she needs proper medical care as soon as possible. The pregnancy appears to be progressing normally despite everything she's been through." Morrison helped Dr. Mitchell to her feet, supporting her weight as she struggled to stand. Months of captivity had weakened her significantly, and the traditional robes she wore were several sizes too large, making movement difficult. "We need to get moving," Hassan said. "Rodriguez is reporting possible vehicle movement on the roads below. Could be the main Taliban force returning." The team quickly gathered what evidence they could from the cave complex, including documents that might help identify other victims or provide intelligence about the trafficking operation. Santos continued to monitor Dr. Mitchell's condition as they prepared for the difficult journey back to the extraction point. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Dr. Mitchell grabbed Morrison's arm and pointed frantically at her throat, then at one of the dead fighters. Santos quickly understood and examined the body, finding a small key in the man's pocket. The key opened a metal collar that had been hidden under Dr. Mitchell's robes, a device designed to deliver electric shocks if she tried to speak or make loud noises. The psychological conditioning had been so complete that even with the collar removed, she remained unable to voice any words. Hassan felt rage building inside him as he looked at the device. Professional soldiers could handle combat and danger, but the deliberate, calculated cruelty of what had been done to this woman tested every bit of his training and discipline. The journey back to the extraction point proved more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Mitchell's physical condition was worse than Santos had initially realized, and every few hundred yards they had to stop to let her rest. The months of captivity had left her muscles weakened and her endurance severely compromised. Morrison and Kim took turns supporting her weight as they moved across the rocky terrain. Despite her obvious exhaustion, Dr. Mitchell pushed herself to keep moving, as if she feared that stopping too long might somehow return her to captivity. Her eyes constantly scanned the darkness around them, jumping at every shadow and sound. Rodriguez's voice came through their radios with increasing urgency. "Commander, I'm tracking multiple vehicle headlights approaching from the south. Looks like at least 3 trucks, maybe more. They'll reach the cave complex in about 20 minutes. Hassan checked his watch and calculated their position. At their current pace, they would still be well short of the extraction point when the enemy force arrived at the caves. Once the Taliban fighters discovered what had happened, they would immediately begin searching the surrounding area. "Santos, how's our patient holding up?" Hassan asked over the radio, She's struggling, sir. Heart rate is elevated. Blood pressure is dropping. I think she's going into shock, probably from the stress of the situation combined with her physical condition. We need to get her to proper medical facilities soon. Hassan made a difficult decision. All teams were changing extraction points. Kim, contact base and have them move the pickup to grid reference 77 Alpha. We'll head for the lower valley instead of the original LZ. The new plan would require them to cross more open ground, but it would also get them away from the cave area before the Taliban reinforcements arrived. Hassan knew it was a calculated risk, but staying on their original route would almost certainly result in contact with a superior enemy force. As they changed direction toward the new extraction point, Dr. Mitchell stumbled and fell. Santos immediately knelt beside her and began checking her vital signs. The medic's expression grew increasingly concerned as she worked. Commander, her blood sugar is dropping rapidly. The stress and physical exertion are burning through the glucose I gave her earlier. I need to administer more medication, but we're running low on supplies. Hassan looked back toward the cave complex, where they could now see lights moving in the distance. The enemy was closer than Rodriguez had estimated, and they were running out of time. But Santos was right. Dr. Mitchell couldn't continue much further without medical intervention. How long do you need? Hassan asked. 5 minutes to stabilize her, then we can move again, but she's going to need frequent breaks. Morrison volunteered to stay with Santos and Dr. Mitchell, while the rest of the team established a defensive perimeter. As the medic worked, Morrison tried to communicate with their patient using hand gestures and simple yes or no questions. Through this basic communication, they learned that Dr. Mitchell remembered being taken from her clinic in Kabul while treating patients. She had been drugged and transported to several different locations before ending up in the cave complex. The Taliban had kept her alive because they believed American doctors would bring high ransom payments. Santos finished administering medication and helped Dr. Mitchell sit up. The glucose should help, but her system is severely compromised. Her body has been surviving on minimal nutrition for months. As they prepared to move again, Rodriguez reported more disturbing news. Commander, the vehicles have reached the caves and they're deploying search teams. I count at least 15 fighters and they're spreading out in all directions. Hassan knew they were in serious trouble. 15 Taliban fighters who knew the terrain intimately would be able to cover ground much faster than his team while carrying an injured civilian. They needed a new plan, and they needed it quickly. Chen, Parker, fall back to position 3 and set up a delaying action. Use the terrain to slow them down, but don't get decisively engaged. Williams, take point and find us the fastest route to the new LZ. The team began moving again, with Morrison and Kim supporting Dr. Mitchell between them. Santos stayed close, monitoring her patient's condition, and ready to provide additional medical care if needed. The medic had seen combat casualties before, but there was something particularly heartbreaking about treating someone who had suffered for months in captivity. As they crossed a narrow ridge, Dr. Mitchell suddenly stopped and pointed back toward the cave area. Through the darkness, they could see flashlights moving in organized search patterns. The Taliban fighters were methodical and professional in their approach. This wasn't a random group of insurgents, but a well-trained unit. Santos noticed that Dr. Mitchell was trembling more violently now, and not just from the cold mountain air. The sight of her former captors searching for her had triggered what appeared to be a panic attack. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and she began hyperventilating. I need to treat her for acute stress reaction, Santos told Hassan. If she keeps hyperventilating like this, she could pass out or worse. The medic guided Dr. Mitchell to a seated position behind a large boulder and began talking to her in a calm, steady voice. She demonstrated slow, controlled breathing and encouraged the woman to match her rhythm. Gradually, Dr. Mitchell's breathing began to slow and her trembling decreased. Williams called back from his scouting position ahead. Commander, I found a route down to the valley floor, but it's steep and there's a lot of loose rock. It'll be dangerous in the dark, especially with an injured person. Hassan studied their options. Behind them, the Taliban search teams were getting closer by the minute. Ahead lay a treacherous descent that could easily result in serious injury to Dr. Mitchell or any of his team members. But staying where they were wasn't an option either. Santos, can she handle a steep descent with support? The medic looked at her patient critically. Dr. Mitchell was exhausted, undernourished, and suffering from severe psychological trauma. But she was also a survivor who had endured months of captivity. and was now within reach of freedom. "She's stronger than she looks," Santos said finally. "If we take it slow and keep her between two team members, I think she can make it." Dr. Mitchell seemed to understand what they were discussing. She looked directly at Hassan and nodded firmly, then struggled to her feet. Despite everything she had been through, there was still determination in her eyes. The same determination that had led her to volunteer for medical work in one of the world's most dangerous countries. The descent down the rocky slope tested every bit of the team's training and Dr. Mitchell's remaining strength. Williams led the way, testing each foothold and marking safe paths with infrared markers visible only through night vision equipment. Morrison and Kim positioned themselves on either side of Dr. Mitchell, ready to catch her if she slipped. Santos followed directly behind, carrying additional medical supplies and monitoring her patient's condition. Every few minutes she would check Dr. Mitchell's pulse and breathing, watching for signs that the physical exertion was becoming too much for her weakened system. Halfway down the slope, loose rocks gave way under Morrison's feet, and he slid several yards before catching himself on a sturdy boulder. The noise echoed across the valley, and Hassan immediately called for everyone to freeze in place. They waited in tense silence, listening for any indication that the Taliban searchers had heard the sound. Rodriguez's voice came through their earpieces in a whisper. "Multiple lights now moving toward your area. They definitely heard something. You've got maybe 10 minutes before they reach your position." Hassan made a quick decision. "All teams, accelerate descent. We'll risk the noise to gain speed." The next several minutes were a controlled fall down the mountainside. The SEALs abandoned stealth in favor of speed, half carrying Dr. Mitchell between them as they slid and scrambled over the rocky terrain. Santos stayed close, ready to provide immediate medical attention if anyone was injured during the rapid descent. Dr. Mitchell surprised everyone with her resilience. Despite her weakened condition, she seemed to find reserves of strength and determination that kept her moving, even when the terrain became nearly vertical. Her months of survival had taught her to endure far more than anyone should have to bear. They reached the valley floor just as flashlight beams began sweeping the upper sections of the slope they had just descended. Hassan immediately led the team toward a dry creek bed that would provide concealment and a route toward the new extraction point. "Williams, what's our distance to the LZ?" Hassan asked. "About 800 meters, sir. But there's open ground for the last 300 meters. No cover except for scattered rocks." Santos checked Dr. Mitchell's condition again and found her pulse racing but steady. The adrenaline from their escape was actually helping to keep her blood sugar stable, but the medic knew that crash would come soon. They needed to reach the extraction point before her body gave out completely. Behind them, they could hear voices shouting in Pashto as the Taliban fighters reached the top of the slope they had just descended. Rodriguez reported that the searchers were beginning their own descent, moving more carefully but with the advantage of knowing the terrain intimately. The team moved through the creek bed as quickly as possible while Dr. Mitchell's strength allowed. The sandy bottom muffled their footsteps, but it also made walking more difficult for someone in her weakened condition. Morrison and Kim continued to support most of her weight between them. As they approached the edge of the open ground that separated them from the extraction point, Kim's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Go 7, this is Dustoff 2-1. We're inbound to your new location. What's your status?" Hassan responded quickly. "Dustoff 2-1. We have one civilian casualty requiring immediate medical evacuation. Be advised, we have enemy forces in pursuit. Hot LZ likely." "Roger, Go 7. We're prepared for hot extraction. Mark your position with IR strobe when you hear our engines." The sound of the approaching helicopter reached them just as they emerged from the creek bed. The open ground stretched ahead of them like a football field, with the extraction point marked by Williams's infrared beacon on the far side. Dr. Mitchell looked at the distance they still had to cover and took a deep breath. Santos could see the determination in her patient's eyes, but she was also concerned about pushing her too hard. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. Dr. Mitchell nodded and pointed toward the helicopter, then made a running motion with her hands. Despite everything she had endured, she was ready to give everything she had left to reach freedom. "All teams, we're crossing the open ground now. Weapons ready, but remember we have a civilian in the middle of our formation," Hassan commanded. They began the final sprint toward the extraction point, With Dr. Mitchell somehow finding the strength to run despite months of captivity and malnutrition, the helicopter was descending rapidly, its crew chiefs already preparing for a combat extraction. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent news. Multiple hostiles emerging from the creek bed behind you. They're in pursuit and closing fast. Gunfire erupted from behind them as the Taliban fighters reached the open ground and spotted the fleeing Americans. Bullets whined overhead and kicked up dirt around their feet. But the team maintained their pace toward the landing zone. Dr. Mitchell stumbled and would have fallen, but Morrison and Kim caught her and continued running while essentially carrying her between them. Santos stayed close behind, ready to provide medical treatment for any wounds. The helicopter touched down with its engines still running, and crew chiefs providing suppressing fire toward the Taliban pursuers. Hassan's team sprinted the final 50 meters under covering fire, with Dr. Mitchell somehow maintaining her footing despite her exhaustion. They reached the aircraft just as more intense gunfire erupted from the tree line beyond the creek bed. The Taliban had brought additional reinforcements, and the situation was rapidly deteriorating into a major firefight. Morrison and Kim lifted Dr. Mitchell into the helicopter cabin, where Navy flight medics immediately took over her care. Santos quickly briefed them on her condition and the medical treatment she had already provided during the escape. As the rest of the team boarded the aircraft, Hassan took one last look back toward the cave complex where they had found Dr. Mitchell. The Taliban fighters were still pursuing, but they were too far away to effectively engage the helicopter. In a few minutes, Dr. Mitchell would be safe aboard a hospital ship in the Persian Gulf. The helicopter lifted off just as rocket-propelled grenades began exploding in the area they had just vacated. The crew chief slammed the cabin door shut and gave Hassan a thumbs-up signal. They had made it out with their precious cargo intact. Santos knelt beside Dr. Mitchell in the helicopter's cabin, checking her vital signs and preparing her for the flight to the medical facility. The woman's eyes were closed, but she was conscious and breathing steadily. For the first time in months, she was truly safe. The hospital ship USNS Mercy appeared on the horizon like a floating city of hope and healing. Dr. Mitchell had slept for most of the helicopter flight, finally allowing her body to rest after months of constant fear and vigilance. Santos had monitored her throughout the journey, administering fluids and medication to stabilize her condition. As the helicopter approached the ship's landing deck, a full medical team stood ready. Word had already been passed about the rescued American doctor, and the ship's medical staff had prepared everything needed for her care. Dr. Mitchell's eyes opened as she felt the aircraft beginning its descent, and she looked around with confusion before remembering where she was. Morrison squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now, Doc. We're landing on a U.S. Navy hospital ship. These people are going to take good care of you." The medical team quickly transferred Dr. Mitchell from the helicopter to a gurney and wheeled her toward the ship's medical facilities. Santos accompanied them, providing a detailed report of her patient's condition and the treatment she had received during the rescue operation. Hassan and his team watched as Dr. Mitchell disappeared into the ship's interior, finally allowing themselves to feel a sense of accomplishment. They had completed one of the most challenging rescues of their careers, bringing home an American who had given up her safety to help others in a dangerous part of the world. Inside the ship's medical bay, Dr. Mitchell underwent a comprehensive examination by a team of specialists. The ship's doctors found evidence of prolonged malnutrition, dehydration, and both physical and psychological trauma. But they also found something remarkable. Despite everything she had endured, her pregnancy was progressing normally. Dr. James Crawford, the ship's chief medical officer, spoke with Santos about the case. "Your field treatment probably saved her life," he told the Navy medic. "Her blood sugar levels were dangerously unstable, and without immediate intervention, she could have gone into diabetic coma." Santos felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she listened to the assessment. She was proud that her medical skills had helped save Dr. Mitchell's life, but she was also deeply affected by the evidence of what the woman had suffered during her captivity. 3 days later, Dr. Mitchell had recovered enough to attempt communication beyond simple gestures. The ship's psychologist, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, had been working with her to overcome the psychological conditioning that prevented her from speaking. The trauma of the shock collar had created a deep-seated fear of making any sound. Hassan visited Dr. Mitchell in her hospital room, bringing with him the personal items they had recovered from the cave complex. Her passport, medical certificates, and a small notebook filled with her handwriting were among the few possessions that remained from her previous life. When Dr. Mitchell saw her notebook, tears streamed down her face. She clutched it to her chest, and for the first time since her rescue, she attempted to speak. The sound that emerged was barely a whisper, but it was clearly an attempt at the word thank you. Hassan felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm his professional composure. "You don't need to thank us, ma'am. You're a hero for the work you were doing over there. We're just glad we could bring you home." Dr. Mitchell opened her notebook and began writing. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "I never gave up hope that someone would come. I knew Americans don't abandon their own." Over the following days, Dr. Mitchell gradually began to recover her voice. The ship's medical team worked closely with her, using both physical therapy for her damaged vocal cords and psychological counseling to overcome the trauma-induced fear of speaking. Each day brought small improvements. Santos visited her patient regularly, developing a friendship that went beyond the typical medic-patient relationship. Dr. Mitchell wrote extensive notes about her experience, partly as therapy and partly to provide intelligence that might help prevent other kidnappings. Through her written accounts, the full horror of her captivity became clear. She had been moved between multiple locations, always held with other kidnapped civilians from various countries. The Taliban cell that had taken her was part of a larger network involved in human trafficking and ransom operations. The information she provided led to several follow-up operations by Special Forces teams, resulting in the rescue of other hostages and the disruption of the trafficking network. Her courage in documenting everything she had witnessed would eventually save other lives. Morrison also became a regular visitor, bringing her books and magazines to help pass the time during her recovery. He was amazed by her resilience and positive attitude despite everything she had endured. Even while recovering from months of trauma, she continued to ask about the medical needs of other patients on the ship. Dr. Crawford kept Hassan informed about her medical progress. "Her physical recovery is remarkable," he reported. "The pregnancy is stable, and we've got her diabetes well controlled. But the psychological healing will take much longer. What she went through would break most people." As the ship headed toward port, Dr. Mitchell's family was notified that she had been found alive. Her parents, who had spent months not knowing whether their daughter was dead or alive, were overjoyed to learn she was safe and would soon be returning home. The night before they reached port, Dr. Mitchell asked to speak with the entire rescue team. Santos helped her to the ship's conference room, where Hassan and his SEALs were waiting. Her voice was still weak and hoarse, but she was determined to express her gratitude properly. "I know that what you did was your job," she began slowly. "But you gave me back my life. You gave my baby a chance to be born free. I will never forget what you risked for me." Hassan responded for the entire team. "Dr. Mitchell, you were serving your country just as much as we were. You went to Afghanistan to help people who needed medical care, knowing the risks. We're honored that we could bring you home." Rodriguez, who had provided overwatch during the rescue, spoke up. "Ma'am, what you survived took more courage than any of us have ever had to show. You're the real hero in this story." Dr. Mitchell smiled for the first time since her rescue, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and reminded everyone present of the vibrant young doctor she had been before her ordeal. The healing process would be long and difficult, but in that moment, they could all see that she would eventually recover completely. That evening, Santos found Dr. Mitchell on the ship's deck, looking out at the ocean. The medic joined her at the railing, and they stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes. "What will you do when you get home?" Santos asked finally. Dr. Mitchell touched her growing belly gently. "First, I'm going to have this baby and make sure he or she grows up, knowing how many good people there are in the world. Then when I'm ready, I think I'll go back to helping people, maybe not in Afghanistan, but somewhere." Santos smiled at her patient's determination. "The world needs more doctors like you, and more medics like you," Dr. Mitchell replied. "You saved my life out there, Maria. I hope you know that." As the hospital ship continued its journey toward home, both women knew that their lives had been forever changed by their brief time together. For Dr. Mitchell, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. For Santos, it reinforced her commitment to her calling as a military medic. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood before a gathering of Navy SEALs and medical personnel at the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. She held her 3-month-old daughter Emma in her arms, a beautiful baby girl who represented hope and new beginnings after months of darkness. The occasion was a ceremony to honor the team that had rescued her, but Dr. Mitchell had insisted on speaking about something else entirely. In her clear, strong voice and fully recovered, now from the trauma of her captivity, she addressed the audience with a message that would resonate far beyond that room. When I decided to volunteer for medical service in Afghanistan, she began, I thought I understood what courage meant. I thought courage was about being willing to help people in dangerous places, about putting others' needs before your own safety. Hassan, Morrison, Santos, and the rest of the rescue team sat in the front row, watching the remarkable transformation of the broken woman they had carried out of that cave. Emma slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her very existence was a testament to human resilience. But I learned something during those months in captivity. Dr. Mitchell continued, real courage isn't just about making one brave decision. It's about getting up every single day and choosing hope over despair, choosing to believe in tomorrow when today seems impossible to survive. Santos wiped away tears as she listened. The bond she had formed with Dr. Mitchell during that helicopter ride had grown into a lasting friendship. She had been present for Emma's birth, serving as the baby's honorary aunt and godmother. The men and women who rescued me showed a different kind of courage, Dr. Mitchell said, looking directly at Hassan's team. They risked everything for someone they had never met, someone who wasn't part of their mission, someone who was just a stranger in trouble. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He still had nightmares sometimes about that cave complex and what they had found there, but seeing Dr. Mitchell healthy and whole, holding her daughter and speaking with such strength, made every moment of that dangerous mission worthwhile. But there's something else I want you to know, Dr. Mitchell continued, her voice growing stronger. The real heroes in this story aren't wearing uniforms. They're the Afghan interpreters who risked their lives to provide intelligence about human trafficking networks. They're the local doctors who secretly treated kidnapped victims. They're the ordinary people who chose to fight against evil even when no one was watching. Rodriguez nodded from his position in the back of the room. The intelligence Dr. Mitchell had provided had indeed led to the identification of several Afghan civilians who had been helping kidnapping victims, often at great personal risk to themselves and their families. My daughter will grow up knowing that when bad things happen in this world, there are always good people ready to stand up and fight back, Dr. Mitchell said, gently rocking Emma. She'll know that American servicemen and women are willing to risk everything to bring their fellow citizens home. After the ceremony, Dr. Mitchell had the opportunity to speak privately with each member of the rescue team. She thanked Morrison for his gentle manner during those terrifying moments in the cave. She hugged Rodriguez and thanked him for his precision shooting that had eliminated the immediate threat. She spoke with Kim about the importance of military communications in coordinating complex rescues. When she reached Santos, the two women embraced like old friends. How are you really doing? Santos asked quietly. Better every day, Dr. Mitchell replied honestly. The nightmares are getting fewer and the therapy is helping. Emma gives me something positive to focus on every morning. Santos looked at the sleeping baby and marveled at how much had changed since that night in Afghanistan. Have you thought about going back to international medical work? Dr. Mitchell smiled. Actually, I've been working with the State Department to develop better protocols for protecting medical volunteers overseas. And I'm planning to establish a foundation to support families of kidnapped aid workers. Hassan joined them, and Dr. Mitchell turned to address the team leader, who had made the split-second decision to change their mission from intelligence gathering to rescue. Commander, I need you to know that what you did that night changed more than just my life. Hassan looked puzzled, so Dr. Mitchell continued. The intelligence I was able to provide led to the rescue of 12 other hostages from that trafficking network. 12 people who are alive today because you made the choice to help a stranger. The weight of those words settled over Hassan like a warm blanket. In his years of military service, he had completed many successful missions, but knowing that one decision had ultimately saved 13 lives made every risk they had taken that night seem insignificant. As the gathering began to disperse, Dr. Mitchell made one final announcement. I've named my daughter Emma Grace Mitchell Santos in honor of the Navy medic who kept me alive during the most important helicopter ride of my life. Santos felt her knees grow weak with emotion. She had been honored many times during her military career, but having a baby named after her was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Later that evening, as the team gathered for an informal dinner, Morrison raised his glass in a toast to Dr. Mitchell and baby Emma, and to the reminder that sometimes the most important missions are the ones we never planned for. The group drank to that sentiment, but Hassan added his own observation. And to the reminder that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's about pulling a trigger at the right moment, and sometimes it's about surviving hell and still choosing to help others. As the sun set over the California coast, the members of the rescue team reflected on how a routine intelligence mission had become something much more significant. They had learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms, that courage can't be taught in training schools, and that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen one person at a time. Dr. Mitchell returned to her hotel room that night and wrote in the journal she had kept since her rescue. Emma slept through her first military ceremony today, she wrote. Someday I'll tell her about the brave people who made sure she could be born free. And I'll teach her that when someone needs help, you don't ask whether it's your job or whether it's safe. You just help because that's what good people do. Outside her window, the lights of Coronado Naval Base twinkled like stars, representing thousands of servicemen and women ready to risk everything for people they would never meet. It was a comforting thought as she drifted off to sleep, her daughter safe in her arms,